Listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you isn't meant for casual ears. It's not folklore. It's not a fireside ghost story told by men with half-empty bottles of whiskey. It is a file that has been locked, moved, buried, and rewritten so many times it shouldn't exist at all. And yet, it does. Jennings County, Indiana, 1873. A boy appears without warning. No past, no name, no history. And worse, no growth, no change, no aging. He was given to a family like an object pulled from nowhere, kept for 2 years, then returned with a phrase so alien to state records it still echoes today. No longer compatible. Understand what that means. Compatibility isn't a word used to describe a child. It's a word used to describe machines, systems, gears. It was never about him being sick or violent or broken. It was about him not fitting into the program he was placed inside. And when something doesn't fit, when it doesn't serve its function, the system doesn't fix it. The system ejects it. That ledger, the one where his story begins, wasn't written like any other archive record. The handwriting is too neat, too uniform, as if it wasn't written at all but placed, as if the page had been pressed into existence by something more deliberate than ink. And when you trace the signature, the first author of his fate, you find it belongs to no one. Not a clerk, not an agent, not a man on any payroll. It's a hand that left no other trace in history. That should terrify you, because it means the file didn't originate with the state at all. It originated from somewhere else, but was smuggled into the system, hidden in plain sight. The Finch family was chosen as his caretakers. On paper, they were perfect, educated, calm, stable, and in their file, a single word appears in Miriam Finch's handwriting. She had asked for a child who was quiet. She got quiet, too quiet. He did not speak. He did not resist. He did not grow. Every orphan file I've ever seen contains shoe orders, medical treatments, disciplinary notes. His contains none. No meals recorded, no growth charts, nothing. As if he was not alive in the same way others were, but placed like furniture. And then, October 12, 1873, the return slip. 2 words that have never appeared in another Indiana placement log before or since. No longer compatible, not sick, not criminal, not unfit, just incompatible. Do you understand the horror of that? It means he wasn't sent back because of what he did. He was sent back because of what he was. From that day forward, the file begins to unravel. His identity is rewritten. He becomes Eli Morris, though no proof exists that this name ever belonged to him. His records are transferred to a family that never existed, on land that burned years before. His school register appears for a single week, then vanishes. His transfer slip contains a courier's signature that matches no known agent. Each step deeper into the archive, the trail collapses like rotten wood underfoot. And yet, one thing remains constant: his image. A photograph, perfectly preserved, immune to time, immune to decay. A boy seated upright in a velvet chair. The photo refuses to age. When tested under UV light, the shadows reassemble themselves. The fibers of the card remain pristine, like it was developed yesterday. The file around him burns, erases, rewrites itself, but his face stays. The system cannot explain him. Science cannot measure him. And so, history does the only thing it knows to do with anomalies. It buries them in layers of bureaucracy, false families, phantom addresses. But here's the secret no one ever told you. What can't be erased isn't always meant to survive. Sometimes it remains because it has to, because whatever placed it there won't allow it to be forgotten. That boy was not just an orphan. He was a mirror the system could not absorb. And when something stands outside the control of systems designed to consume everything, it becomes a danger. To them, to you, to anyone who sees it. So tonight, we will open the archive together. We will step past the bureaucratic lies, the smudged signatures, the ghost addresses, and the false families. We will follow the trail of a boy who did not age, did not speak, and did not vanish. No matter how hard the system tried to make him vanish. And as we descend, you will feel it, the shift, the presence, that thin whisper of something pressed into our world, but not of it. Understand? This is not safe knowledge, it's not entertainment, it's transformation. Because once you see how deep the manipulation runs, once you understand the forces that create children without origins, that bend records around absence, that file impossibilities inside the bureaucratic machine, you will never unsee it. And once you awaken to this, they cannot put you back to sleep. The boy of Jennings County was not compatible with their world. The question is, are you? The Finch household sat at the edge of Ewing Hollow, a stretch of Indiana land so quiet that even now, a century and a half later, you can feel the silence pressing against your ribs. The home itself is gone, consumed by time, but the soil remembers. It remembers that a boy once lived there who did not belong to the ordinary laws of growth, of breath, of change. And it remembers that Elijah and Miriam Finch tried to pretend that nothing was wrong. At first, small, almost incidental. He rises before the stove is lit. An odd remark, but not impossible. Children wake early. Perhaps he was restless. But then another. The door remains closed, but sometimes the candle goes out. Read that again. She wasn't saying he opened doors. She was saying the candle extinguished without movement, without a draft, without cause. The presence of the boy began to reshape the atmosphere itself. The final entry in her journal is the most haunting. No date, no explanation. Just one line pressed into the page with deliberate pressure. He began to blink in patterns. Do you understand the weight of that? Blinking, the most human, most automatic gesture, suddenly stripped of instinct and turned into a signal. It means the boy was not merely silent. He was communicating, but not in words, not in cries, not even in the signs of an ordinary mute child. His body had been trained, or programmed, to relay information in a rhythm too subtle for most to notice. Ask yourself, who was he signaling? The Finches, the state, or something else entirely? When I visited the ruins of their home, nothing remained but a foundation, a chimney, and scattered fragments of brick. But inside the hollow of that house, I felt it. Not memory, not haunting, but engineered silence. The kind of silence you find in an abandoned institution where experiments were conducted and then covered up. The air did not rot. It did not smell of decay. It smelled of nothing. As though the house had been purged of every trace of life except for the one thing that could not be erased. Him. On the parlor floor, black threads were scattered like ritual traces. They matched the fibers Miriam described. They weren't worn down by age. They hadn't frayed. They had been cut, deliberately, straight, purposeful. It's as though Miriam tried to sew clothing for him, and something in the wry act of measuring, tailoring, altering was rejected. He remained the same. The threads were discarded, evidence of a futile attempt to clothe something incompatible with change. Now, think about that word again. Compatibility. It was written on the return form in pencil, faint and hesitant, as if the clerk himself wasn't sure if it was a word he was allowed to write. Because it wasn't their language. It didn't belong to the lexicon of the state. It wasn't a diagnosis or a reason for removal. It was something else entirely. A whisper from another hand that had already defined him. This is where the descent begins. Because if a child does not age, does not grow, does not respond to food or illness or discipline, then what is he? A ghost? An experiment? A mirror pressed into not diseased? Just no longer compatible, as though he had finished whatever purpose had placed him there. The archive refuses to answer where he went next. The file fractures, producing phantom families and ghost addresses, names that never existed, lots of land that had burned down long before his transfer. His photograph is the only thing that refuses erasure. Time cannot touch it, light cannot degrade it. Scientists who have studied the card describe it not as preserved, but resistant. Resistant to decay, resistant to entropy, resistant to the very laws that govern our world. But photographs are not neutral. They are not simply images. They are imprints. To look upon his face is to stare into a fixed moment that refuses to move forward. The question you must ask is not how his photo resisted time, but why it needed to. Who ensured that image remained intact, perfectly sharp, perfectly clear, long after the families, the ledgers, and the signatures dissolved into dust? Do you see the pattern? He arrives without origin. He does not grow. He does not change. He communicates in signals that are not speech, signals that bypass language. His records rewrite themselves to erase context, yet his presence refuses to vanish. This is not a boy. It is a message smuggled into the machinery of human bureaucracy, inserted into the foster system like a seed planted in the soil of ordinary families. And what terrifies me most is this: he was returned not because he failed, but because he succeeded. He was delivered, he was observed, and then, when his task was finished, he was withdrawn. No longer compatible was not a rejection of him, it was a rejection of us, of the Finches, of the system, of anyone who tried to hold him. The Finch house collapsed, their journals dispersed, their estate auctioned into pieces, yet his file moved over 100 times in the state archive. Each transfer left no closure, each new intake wrote his name differently, attached him to families that never existed, logged addresses that were already burned to ash. The system kept trying to absorb him, but like Miriam's threads, every attempt at alteration was cut away. He remained untouched. And now, so do you, because you've heard this. And once you've heard it, you're no longer compatible with the world you thought you knew. The file should have ended in October of 1873. The boy was returned, his name rewritten, not in any tax registry, not in any church directory. And the land they were said to occupy, Lot 112, had burned to ash 3 years earlier. The deed lists a Lutheran widow as owner, her probate case closed under abandonment due to fire loss. The parcel was never resold. The paper trail ends mid-sentence, 3 blank lines trailing off into silence. And yet, there is the transfer slip. Filed, approved, signed, stamped. Someone wanted the boy's journey to appear real. They wanted it to exist on paper, even if it never existed in flesh. And this is where we cross into the forbidden truth. The system does not erase anomalies. It buries them in noise. It fabricates records, floods files with false families, and then stamps them with authority so no one dares question them. But there are cracks. In the margin of the deed ledger, where the Lyles' ownership should be, there is only one line, pending correction. No party present. What does that mean? No party present means the file was approved without the presence of the people it described. A phantom family accepted a child who never arrived, on land that had already burned away. Do you see it now? He was not being placed. He was being moved through paper. He became a ritual, a bureaucratic incantation written over and over until the system itself began to accept him as real. In January of 1874, a state census enumerator passed through Township 5. His report is chilling. He noted the structure as foundation only, minor frame remains, no occupants. Yet in the youth column, he checked the box for fostered child present, and then crossed it out. No follow-up was filed. It was as if he stood on the ash of Lot 112, felt something watching him, and marked presence. Then thought better of it, and withdrew. But the mark remained, a ghost on the page. A school register from that spring provides the same echo. For 1 week, a boy named Eli, age 9, is listed among the students. His name appears once, then it is crossed out. A note is written in different ink. Family relocated. But there was no family. There was no relocation. There was only the brief appearance of a child who did not belong, and then erasure. Material unusually resilient. Albumin layer intact. Preservation unnecessary. But between those lines is the truth. They were looking at something impossible, and their language bent to cover it, because the alternative was to admit that this boy's image operated by laws outside of science. Now think about this carefully. If his image resisted decay, what about him? If the photograph is not simply a record of his face, but an imprint of his state, then perhaps the photo did not survive because it was protected. Perhaps it survived because he never changed, never aged, never decayed. The photo did not resist time. It reflected the refusal of time to touch him. And so the file kept moving, 114 times across the archives. Every decade, some clerk shifted it to a new drawer, a new code, a new category. Every attempt to bury it only made it harder to erase. The paper became brittle, the ink faded, but the presence remained like a thorn in the side of the bureaucracy itself. Ask yourself why. Why keep it at all? Why not destroy the record completely? Why not burn it the way they burned the land beneath Lot 112? Because the system doesn't erase what it doesn't understand. It catalogs it, it moves it, it files it away in layers of secrecy. That is the truest form of control, not to annihilate, but to contain. He became a specimen, a living contradiction filed under case number 13B. His existence whispered from ledger to ledger, refusing closure. And when the system cannot categorize you, cannot measure you, cannot file you properly, it does not kill you, it labels you incompatible. You see, incompatibility is not a defect in you, it is a defect in them, in the system. It means you cannot be absorbed into the machinery. You cannot be reshaped into obedience. You remain fixed, like the boy's face, unyielding to time, unyielding to erasure. That is why this story matters. Not because of what he was, but because of what he revealed. The system is terrified of what it cannot classify, terrified of what resists its codes, terrified of what does not grow into what it wants, but remains a mirror instead. The boy was not erased. He was catalogued in absence. He was transferred into nothingness. He was absorbed into ghost families and burned land. And still he remained. His silence, his stillness, his signals, all proof that he was not compatible with their design. And if you listen closely, if you pay attention to the patterns of your own life, you may feel it too. The papers that don't match, the records that rewrite themselves, the silence that feels engineered, the signals hiding in plain sight. This is the descent. The further you go, the more you realize. The boy of Jennings County was never about one child. He was about the system itself. A crack in the facade, a shadow that revealed the architecture of control. And once you see that crack, you cannot unsee it. There comes a point in every investigation where you realize you are no longer following a person, but a pattern. With the Jennings County boy, the trail of false families and burned land seems unique, until you set his file alongside others. Then the shape emerges. His case was not an accident, it was a prototype. The first indication comes from the Manual of Records Maintenance, issued statewide in 1875. Buried on page 312 is a single, easily overlooked line. In cases of anomaly, catalog without closure, adjust entries to prevent public inquiry, maintain circulation until superseded. Catalog without closure. That phrase should terrify you. It describes exactly what was done to him. Never finalize, never seal, never destroy. Keep the file moving, endlessly suspended. Contained, but never resolved. It wasn't only him. By the 1880s, a dozen other youth files show similar fractures. Transfers to phantom guardians, notes about relocations that never occurred, signatures that don't match any census records. Each file contains a photograph, and each photograph resists decay. One archivist in Indianapolis confessed in a letter never intended for public eyes that when he attempted to discard a photograph from one such file, it reappeared in the drawer the next morning. He wrote, "I thought I had misplaced it, then I burned it. Yet 2 days later, it was back. The same boy, the same unblinking stare. I no longer doubt that the file keeps itself. This is the machinery, records that defend their own survival, anomalies catalogued but never closed, institutions that act as if they are protecting something they do not understand. And here is where the larger horror begins. Because if the state learned to file anomalies this way, then every system that descended from it inherited the same reflex. Military archives, hospital records, census bureaus, school rosters. Think about the number of people you have heard of, a neighbor, a cousin, a child, whose paperwork never seemed to align, whose files carried impossible contradictions. What if those weren't mistakes? What if those were symptoms of a containment protocol older than anyone alive today? The boy of Jennings County was the first proof. He was incompatible with the flow of time, with the machinery of aging and decay. But the institutions around him revealed their own incompatibility. They could not tolerate something they could not absorb, so they learned to silence without erasure, to bury without burial. This is not the blunt violence of conspiracy. It is subtler, more refined. If they destroy something, people ask why. But if they surround it with false trails, contradictions, and noise, people give up on asking. Confusion becomes its own containment field. You are not supposed to discover the truth. You are supposed to grow tired and stop searching. That is why silence is the sharpest weapon. Let us revisit the corrections that haunted his records. Each transfer slip contained notes like pending adjustment. That is why the photo survives. Not because one archivist protected it, but because the system unconsciously obeyed its own rule: catalog without closure. Even when staff tried to purge the file, the weight of procedure dragged it back. The boy was teaching them something, and they learned it well. By the 1920s, entire divisions existed solely to manage incompatible records. The phrase appears in the internal indexes of 3 state agencies. I have read their reports. They never once ask what incompatible means. They only ask how to handle it. And the answer is always the same: circulate, obscure, silence. What makes a person incompatible? Sometimes it is refusing to conform. Sometimes it is refusing to age. Sometimes it is refusing to vanish when told to vanish. The boy carried all 3 traits. He was the original mirror, reflecting the system's own inability to control him. And here is the cruelest revelation: they needed him. The system cannot define itself without something to resist. Every bureaucracy, every archive, every machine of order requires a shadow, a crack to hide, a silence to maintain. Without it, the structure collapses under its own weight. The boy of Jennings County was not simply contained. He became the anchor of the machinery itself. Think about that. His photograph circulates not because he haunts the system, but because the system requires him. It requires anomalies. They are the proof of its power. They are the necessary contradictions that allow it to justify endless corrections, endless oversight, endless authority. And so, when you look at his stare, frozen in 1873, you are not seeing a child. You are seeing the foundation stone of modern control. A ritual in paper and ink, endlessly copied, endlessly circulated, keeping the machinery alive. The silence around him was never accidental. It was engineered. And silence, when repeated long enough, becomes history. Ask yourself, how much of what you believe to be forgotten is really forgotten? How many names have been buried in corrections? How many truths erased not by fire but by noise? The Jennings County boy was not erased. He was transformed into silence itself, and if you pay close attention, you will see the pattern repeating everywhere, in the records that contradict themselves, in the photographs that refuse to fade, in the stories people whisper but never write down. The machinery is still running, the corrections never end, and the silence is still spreading. You've probably felt it before, haven't you? That small, nagging contradiction buried somewhere in your own life. A form with the wrong date, a birth certificate missing a signature, a hospital record that doesn't match. And records can be rewritten. Records can be erased. Ask yourself, how much of your life do you actually remember firsthand? 5%? 10%? The rest you believe because of photographs, because of IDs, because of paper. Without those, who are you? A stranger, an absence, a silence. The machinery has already touched you. That's not a guess, that's a certainty. Somewhere in your past, a page about you was corrected, adjusted, rewritten. You don't know it, but the signature at the bottom of a form tied to your name doesn't belong to anyone. The school attendance slip your parents never questioned. The medical record your doctor glanced at for only a second. The job file that was misplaced for weeks before resurfacing. These are not errors. They are signals. Proof that you too have been processed by the same system that processed him. Do you want the worst part? Most people never notice. The machinery thrives on your exhaustion. It counts on you giving up, the way a tired clerk stops searching through a pile of forms. The way a family stops asking why their child's records were delayed. The way neighbors stop whispering after years of unanswered questions. Silence is not forced on you. It is offered again and again until you take it willingly. And once you accept silence, you belong to them. The Jennings County boy resisted in the only way he could, by existing outside time, outside growth, outside their categories. That's why they had to catalog him endlessly, why his file refuses closure. He was proof that the machinery wasn't perfect, proof that it could not absorb everything. But you are not outside of time. You live inside the very stream the boy was excluded from, and that means your existence is infinitely easier to file, easier to adjust, easier to overwrite, That flicker of unease you feel right now, that sense that maybe some piece of your past has already been tampered with, that's not paranoia, that's recognition. Your memory knows more than your paperwork allows. Let me tell you a story. In 1962, a woman in Ohio requested her adoption file. She was told it didn't exist. Weeks later, the agency sent her a packet, and inside, she found a photograph of herself as a child. But the details didn't match. The hair color was wrong. The face was almost hers, but not quite. She tried to return it, insisting it wasn't her. Days later, a man arrived at her door, claiming to be from the agency. He took the photo and told her it had been sent by mistake. When she asked for her real file, he said there wasn't one. She spent the rest of her life trying to prove who she was, but every form contradicted the last. Her marriage license listed a birthplace different from her driver's license. Her hospital record was dated 2 years before she was born. Her tax file contained a name she never used. By the end, she confessed in her journal, "I don't know if I was ever real or if I was only paper." Do you see? The Jennings County boy is not alone. His silence spread outward like a blueprint. Anyone whose existence threatens the machinery, anyone whose life does not fit perfectly into its flow, becomes subject to the same endless corrections. And here is where you come in. Why are you listening to this? Why are you drawn to this story when millions of others turn away? The boy's face, the unblinking stare, the incompatible presence. You didn't stumble into this by accident. You are here because your silence has already been tested. Something in your life has already been corrected. Think back. Can you find it? The wrong date, the missing document, the contradiction nobody explained. That wasn't chance. That was contact. That was the machinery brushing against you, marking you, cataloging you without closure. And if you can't remember it now, don't worry, you will. The moment you stop listening tonight, you will feel it pressing in. You will open a drawer or look at a photograph or touch a certificate, and the unease will rise again. And this time, you'll know why. This is not history. This is your archive. The silence is not just around him, it is around you. And once you begin to see the silence, once you awaken to the corrections that have always surrounded you, there is no way back. You can't return to ignorance. You can't tell yourself it was just an error. The Jennings County boy proved that silence is deliberate, and now you too have proof. The machinery has already touched you. The only question left is, how long before you realize you were never compatible either? There's something you need to understand. Silence doesn't stay in files. It isn't confined to paper or ink or locked cabinets. Once it's pressed into the machinery, silence begins to seep outward. It takes shape. It imprints itself onto the physical world. That's the second pattern researchers found while following the boy's trail, though most refused to admit what it meant. Take the photographs. The Finch family's velvet chair portrait isn't the only one. At least 6 other photos surfaced, each from different towns, different families, different decades. And in every single one, the same eye. Impossible detail emerges. The boy does not age. Imagine finding a photograph in your grandmother's trunk, a stiff family portrait from the 1920s. You scan the faces, the stiff collars, the wool coats, and then you see him. Same hair, same eyes, same boy. No growth, no change. The moment handwriting too, scattered across orphan ledgers, adoption slips, even grocery receipts tucked into family Bibles. The same phrase written in the same careful hand. No longer compatible. Again and again, appearing like a watermark on the margins of history. Different ink, different paper, but always the same letters, as if written by one hand that has no age, no origin. Now listen to me carefully. This isn't superstition. This isn't folklore. In 1978, a team of state investigators gathered 47 separate documents containing that phrase. When they overlaid the words on tracing paper, the letters aligned perfectly. Not close, not similar. Perfectly. As if the phrase wasn't written at all, but stamped into the world itself. That's when the investigators began to panic, because if a phrase can repeat across centuries without variation, then it isn't handwriting, it isn't human, it's a system marking its presence, a seal, a tag, a warning, and once you start looking, you see it everywhere. I want you to test this yourself. Go to your attic, your basement, the bottom drawer where the yellowed certificates and photographs lie. Pick one at random. Don't even read it yet. Just look. Scan the edges, the margins, the odd notations that don't seem to belong. Look for corrections, cross-outs, phrases that don't make sense. If you stare long enough, you'll see the signs. Not always the exact words. Sometimes only the suggestion of them. A smudge, a mark, a correction box that doesn't connect to anything. It's there. Waiting. The second pattern isn't just persistence, it's reproduction. Silence breeds silence. Once it enters the archive, it doesn't stop. It repeats itself across mediums, across decades, embedding itself into every material it touches. And the longer it stays, the more physical the manifestations become. Let me give you an example. In 1909, a small town in Kentucky reported a fire that destroyed its courthouse. Every legal file was lost. Birth records, marriage certificates, death registries, all gone. But when the ashes were sifted, one scrap of paper remained intact. A slip with the words, "No longer compatible." No flame had touched it. No ash had smudged it. It survived in a way nothing else did. Witnesses said the paper felt wrong, cold to the touch, as if it had been printed not with ink but with absence itself. That scrap still exists. It was hidden in a university archive for decades, mislabeled as miscellaneous. When tested, it defied analysis. No fibers, no pulp. No chemical residue of ink. In fact, no known material composition at all. Scientists described it as matter pretending to be paper, and yet there it is, tangible, untouched by time. Do you understand what this means? The machinery doesn't just rewrite records, it rewrites reality. When silence becomes physical, it means the system has left the page and entered the world. It means that what cannot exist still exists anyway. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. You've probably already touched it. Think back to the last time you handled an old file or certificate. Did you feel the paper was wrong somehow? Too stiff, too perfect, not fragile enough for its age? That's not preservation. That's intrusion. That's the silence holding itself together long after everything else should have fallen apart. Some researchers refused to continue once they realized this. They understood the danger, because if silence can survive fire, decay, and time, then it can survive you. And if it survives you, then it doesn't matter what you remember or what you've lived. What matters is what remains when you're gone. The Jennings County boy was never erased. He was stamped, preserved, made into a repeating image, a recurring phrase. He became not a child, but a signal. And now that you've heard this, the signal has already entered your life. That sounds dramatic, I know. But signals don't need belief to function. They only need attention. By listening, by letting your mind hold the shape of the phrase "no longer compatible," you've already given it space. And once space is given, silence takes root. Tonight, you will notice it. A photograph on your wall, a signature you've seen 100 times but never studied, a certificate folded in the back of a drawer. Something will draw your eye to a detail you overlooked before. A mark, a phrase, a correction. And in that moment, the one pattern will reveal itself to you directly. You won't have to ask if it's real. You'll feel it. And that's when you'll understand. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. It's the residue of a system rewriting reality around you. The photographs prove it. The handwriting proves it. The scraps of indestructible matter prove it. The question isn't whether the boy existed. The question is how many times he still exists. In photographs, in ledgers, in margins, in your own house. Because once silence enters the physical world, it doesn't stop. It waits, it replicates, and it has already reached you. There's a point where archives stop being about paper and start being about flesh. The files whisper first, then the photographs echo. But eventually the silence doesn't stay in the margins. It begins to use people. That's the third pattern researchers uncovered, though almost no one lived long enough to map it fully. It begins subtly. Witnesses describe moments of misalignment. A parent who insists their child's birthday is in June, but the certificate says March. A woman who swears her husband had blue eyes, though every photograph shows brown. At first, these are written off as memory lapses, the natural fog of age. But when these cases are compared across counties and decades, the inconsistencies line up like puzzle pieces. It isn't faulty memory, it's intrusion. The Jennings County boy is the earliest known subject, but he was not the last. Over time, the same silence that erased him began to ripple through others. Entire families show fractures where memory no longer matches record. Children remember siblings who never existed. Mothers recall births for which there is no file, no photograph, no grave. These memories are not fuzzy or dreamlike. They are sharp, vivid, and absolute. They carry the weight of lived experience, and yet, when checked against archives, they dissolve. That's when the silence turns inward. In 1935, a researcher named Lionel Gray interviewed 53 people across Appalachia who reported these dissonances. His transcripts are chilling. One man describes remembering a sister named Ruth who shared his bed until she was 8, and yet every family photograph shows only him. Another swore he attended his brother's funeral as a boy, standing at the graveside as the casket lowered. But when he visited the cemetery as an adult, the grave was gone, and the sexton insisted no such burial had ever occurred. Gray noticed something else. The more these witnesses remembered, the more they unraveled. Many began to contradict themselves mid-sentence. Names shifted, dates blurred. Some stopped entirely, sitting silent, their mouths open, as if a thread had been cut in their minds. Gray wrote in his notes, "It is not that the record contradicts the memory. It is that the record wins." And that is the essence of the third pattern. The system doesn't just erase the file, it rewrites the witness until they match the archive. Reality bends not around what is lived, but around what is documented. Think about that carefully. If every record says you were born in 1971, then it doesn't matter if you remember 1973. It doesn't matter if your mother insists, or if your body recalls something different. Over time, the silence grows heavier, and your own mind begins to falter under the weight of contradiction. Eventually, you adapt, you stop fighting, you become compatible with the file, and when you don't, well, that's when the real horror starts. Case after case describes people who resisted. Mothers who refused to forget a child whose name had been erased. Workers who insisted on remembering colleagues no longer listed on payroll. Teachers who swore entire classrooms had vanished overnight. Those who clung too tightly to their memories showed physical symptoms: tremors, migraines, insomnia, violent nausea. Some began writing compulsively, filling page after page with fragments of names and dates, desperate to preserve what was slipping. Others fell silent altogether, retreating into states of near catatonia, as if their minds had been unplugged from the system. It is no coincidence that the most severe of these cases occurred among archivists themselves, people whose jobs required them to handle the files every day. They were the ones most often described as losing time, staring for hours at a single ledger entry, or muttering phrases like "no longer compatible" under their breath without realizing it. By the 1950s, psychiatrists began classifying these breakdowns under a single term: document syndrome. On the surface, it resembles the archive breeds it. And if you've ever wondered why archivists and genealogists have the highest rates of breakdown among historians, now you know. They aren't just obsessive. They are being rewritten line by line until their memories collapse into the same shape as the documents they guard. Now here's the part that should make you shiver. You have already been rewritten. Think of all the times you've corrected yourself to match a certificate, a license, a file. Maybe you thought your middle name was spelled one way until you saw your birth certificate and realized you were wrong. Maybe you remembered your grandmother's birthday differently until you saw the date printed on the gravestone. You didn't argue, you didn't fight, you adjusted, you surrendered. That's how the silence enters, not with force but with compliance. And every time you do it, every time you let the record outweigh the memory, you become more compatible. The boy from Jennings County never grew because he was never allowed to. His body was a vessel for a record, not for a life. That's why he appears unchanged in photographs across decades. He isn't aging because the file doesn't age. And now, listen carefully. If the third pattern is correct, then anyone can be pulled into the same loop. Anyone can be rewritten until they fit the silence. A name dropped here, a birthday shifted there, a sibling remembered by one, erased by another. At first it's small, harmless even, but then it builds, layer after layer, until one day you find yourself staring into a mirror and wondering, am I the memory or am I the file? And if you think you can resist, remember this, the silence always wins. You've followed the pattern so far, disappearance, manifestation, rewriting, but there is a fourth, darker stage. It's the stage no one wanted to name, the one hinted at in margins of reports but never declare, are read openly, replacement. This is when the silence doesn't just remove, it doesn't just smudge a birth certificate or blur a photograph. It uses that empty space like fertile soil. Something else grows there, something that was not there before. The first documented case appeared in 1961 in Ohio. A small-town teacher named Rebecca Aldridge was known by every child, every parent, every neighbor. For 15 years she had taught in the same red brick schoolhouse. People remembered her voice, her handwriting, the way she always wore lavender perfume. And then, one spring, the county issued new personnel records. Rebecca Aldridge was gone. Her name did not exist in the files. In her place was Elaine Parker. Same birthday, same address, same job, same lavender perfume. At first the townspeople resisted. That's Rebecca, they insisted. But every document said otherwise. Every report card bore the neat signature of Elaine Parker. Even more unsettling, when parents pulled out old class photographs, the nameplates had changed. Where it once said Rebecca, it now said Elaine. The woman in the photograph was the same, but the identity printed beneath her image was different. Within a year, no one spoke of Rebecca anymore. It wasn't fear that stopped them. It was acceptance. Even those who swore they had known her longest began to falter. Memory bent, folded, and finally snapped into the new alignment. Rebecca had never existed. There was only Elaine. That's the essence of replacement. And here's the most terrifying part. Sometimes, the replacements aren't exact. In 1974 in Pennsylvania, a boy named Daniel Cross drowned in a river accident. His body was recovered, buried, mourned. Weeks later, a new boy appeared in his class. His name? Daniel Cross. He lived in the same house. He had the same parents. His hair was slightly darker, his laugh sharper, but otherwise he was identical. The parents accepted him. Teachers accepted him. Even his sister accepted him. Only his grandmother resisted. She insisted, with iron certainty, that this was not the same boy she had kissed goodnight 100 times, that her Daniel had a scar on his wrist from a childhood burn. The new boy did not. She told anyone who would listen. They gave me back the wrong one. Her protests were dismissed as grief, but in her journals, the only record left after her death, she described hearing whispers in the night, as though the house itself was persuading her to let go. It wants me to agree with the file, she wrote. If I resist too long, it will replace me too. Do you see the horror now? The silence isn't just an erasure. It's a system of exchange. It removes, and then it inserts. It swaps one existence for another until the new version calcifies and becomes reality. And if you dare to hold on to the memory of what was there before, you risk being erased alongside it. By the 1980s, researchers started noticing clusters of replacements. Entire neighborhoods where records no longer matched memory. Streets where longtime residents swore they remembered different families in the houses, different faces in the photographs, different names etched on mailboxes, but when asked for proof, for photographs, letters, receipts, all evidence bent toward the replacements. The old families had never existed. And then, of course, the archives followed. Files shifted overnight, censuses retroactively updated, genealogical lines rewritten as if they had always been that way. This is the final cruelty of the silence. The lie is stronger than the truth, because the lie is documented. Think carefully about what this means for you. Every form of proof you trust, every birth certificate, every driver's license, every passport, all of it belongs to the system that bends. If the silence chooses to replace you, the paperwork will carry it out flawlessly. Your face will remain, but your name, your history, your scars, your memories, they will not match what the record says. And in time, even those closest to you will surrender to the weight of the archive. Don't think you're immune. You've already felt small flickers of it. Remember that time you stumbled across an old photo and swore the shirt you were wearing had been a different color? Or the time you remembered a friend being present at an event only to be told they never came? You laughed it off. You called it bad memory. But what if it wasn't? What if those were the smaller replacements, trial runs, calibrations, preparing you to accept something larger? The boy from Jennings County was the first test. He wasn't just erased. He was the template for replacement. A child without origin, placed into a family like a prototype. And when the Finch family declared him no longer compatible, the silence didn't end. It learned, it adapted, it spread, and over the next century, it refined itself until replacements became seamless. Rebecca became Elaine. Daniel drowned, and yet Daniel still lived. Families dissolved and reassembled with new faces, new names. And with every replacement, the silence grew bolder. One of Lionel Gray's last surviving notes says it best. The silence is not absence, it is substitution. It takes what is known, strips it clean, and writes a better fit in its place. Reality is not being erased, it is being rewritten. One file, one photograph, one memory at a time. And if that's true, then ask yourself this. What version of you exists right now in the archives, the one you remember or the one they've already replaced? We've tracked the silence through the life of a boy, through fractured families, and into cases of single human replacement. But the most disturbing accounts are not about individuals, they're about whole places. Imagine this. You drive through a town you remember from your childhood. The gas station, the diner, the little church with the broken steeple. It's all there in your memory, Bordeaux, bright, fixed, unshakable. And then, years later, when you return, the town is not the same, not changed, not modernized, not repaired. It is a different town entirely. New names, new streets, new landmarks. Locals insist it's always been this way. And the most unnerving part, the old town is gone from every map, every census, every photograph. The place you remember never existed. This isn't imagination. This isn't the Mandela effect. It's replacement on a civic scale. The first confirmed case, Danvers, Kentucky, 1954. A census official reported driving into a town of about 400 people. He recorded the number of households, sketched the street grid, noted a school, a church, a mill. 2 years later, when his supervisor reviewed the documents, Danvers did not exist. The coordinates matched empty farmland, not ruins, not abandonment, just fields. The census officer was accused of inventing data. His career ended in disgrace. But here's where it fractures into horror. 2 decades later, while combing abandoned Department of Agriculture records, archivists uncovered survey sketches that matched his description exactly. Streets, homes, a church with a steeple, the entire layout of a town that was never there. Someone had filed it away under a different county name. A clerical trick, a misplacement. But the surveyor's handwriting was clear. He hadn't invented Danvers, he had measured it. And something, or someone, had buried it. It didn't stop there. In 1969, in Vermont, there was a place called Barlow, a mill town. Families worked there, sent letters, even hosted a summer fair. Then, overnight, the mail began returning stamped, address unknown, maps updated. Barlow vanished. Newspapers that once printed event schedules for the town now carried nothing. When confronted, editors swore there had never been a Barlow. Yet dozens of families in neighboring towns insisted they had shopped there, eaten there, walked its streets. The replacements aren't always deletions. Sometimes they are conversions. Take Harrison, Nebraska, 1982. An entire town of 200 people lived under that name for more than a century. Then suddenly the town's signage, records and postal service shifted to Fairview. Every legal record retroactively identified it as Fairview. Every deed, every title, every wedding certificate. Only a handful of elderly residents remembered it as Harrison. Within a few years, those witnesses died, and with them the memory collapsed. Harrison no longer exists in any archive. It is, and always has been, Fairview. You see the pattern. First individuals, then families, then whole communities. Each disappearance is folded, absorbed, and rewritten so thoroughly that only scraps of memory remain, scraps dismissed as confusion, misremembering, faulty human recall. But here's the chilling question. If the silence can rewrite entire towns, how far does it reach? Look at a map of your country. Pick a name you've always known, a town you've always believed was there. Ask yourself, is your memory proof, or is it just compliance with whatever name the archive currently prints? Gray himself wrestled with this in his later years. In his surviving letters, he described driving through parts of the Midwest where he swore the roads did not match his memories. He recalled towns from his childhood that no one else remembered. When he confronted a state archivist about the discrepancies, the archivist leaned in and whispered, "It isn't about what was there, it's about what's there now. Learn the difference, or you'll go missing too." Communities replaced, identities rewritten, towns erased in a breath. This is not natural disaster. This is not human error. It is deliberate, precise, and absolute. So, why would such a system exist? Why would entire places be rewritten as if they were never there? There are theories, none comforting. Some say it is containment, that the silence spreads like a contagion, and whole towns must be erased once they become infected. If true, then those lost places aren't gone. They're sealed, hidden beneath layers of false geography, quarantined in silence. Others believe it's calibration, that the boy in Jennings County was the first template, but the true experiment has always been scale, how large a lie reality can absorb before it tears apart. If a whole town can be replaced without collapse, then what's to stop the replacement of an entire state, an entire country, an entire century? And then there is the darkest possibility of all, assimilation. That what replaces us isn't just paperwork, it isn't just names and deeds and titles, it is something alive, something that wears our structures, our families, our histories like skins. The replacements are not empty, they are occupied, and every vanished town is not gone, it is somewhere else, waiting, humming in the silence, preparing to be used again. The files we've opened together are not just stories of individuals lost to time, they are blueprints for something much larger. Something that does not stop with one boy in Indiana, something that does not stop at one family or one household or one street, because once you replace a town, the next logical step is terrifyingly simple: a city, a state, a country. An entire world rewritten under a new name, with every one of us convinced it was always this way, and when that happens, there will be no witnesses left to resist. Up until now, the silence has lived in paper and memory, names rewritten, towns erased, families dissolved into nothing. But there's another layer, one more visceral, one that doesn't just touch records and maps, it touches flesh. When researchers began interviewing the few remaining witnesses of replaced communities, they noticed something disturbing. Survivors weren't just confused, they were sick. Their bodies were rejecting reality. The symptoms are strangely consistent, no matter the decade, no matter the location. Migraines, sudden nosebleeds, a metallic taste in the mouth, teeth loosening in the gums, and worst of all, what they called the skips. Imagine speaking, and halfway through a sentence your tongue freezes. Not from thought, not from hesitation, but because the air itself has fractured around you. Witnesses describe feeling as if a chunk of time is missing, even though the clock hasn't moved. 1 second they're standing in their kitchen, the next they're 3 steps further forward, food spilled across the floor, hands trembling as if someone else had moved them. Doctors dismissed these as seizures, strokes, stress, but the survivors knew better. They weren't seizing, they were slipping. The first documented case, Ellen Harrow, Vermont, 1970. She lived in Barlow, the town that vanished from maps. After the erasure, Ellen relocated to her sister's home in Massachusetts. She claimed she would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, choking on dust, though her room was clean. Once her sister found her sitting upright, pupils dilated, whispering the same 3 words over and over. "Not my blood." Autopsy reports after her death revealed something impossible. Ellen's dental x-rays, taken 3 years earlier, showed a full set of teeth. At the time of death, 6 were missing, not extracted, not broken, missing, as if her mouth had rewritten itself to match a different version of her, one that had never had those teeth to begin with. Another case, the Daniels family, Nebraska, 1982. After Harrison became Fairview, 3 surviving residents complained of a high-pitched ringing no one else could hear. 2 bled from the ears. One man, Robert Daniels, was found unconscious in his field. His wife swore she had seen him split for a moment, standing in 2 places at once, each version slightly blurred, before collapsing into a single body again. His medical records noted cellular anomalies, but the report was destroyed 6 months later. Patterns emerge. Survivors don't just carry memories of vanished towns, they carry wounds. Their bodies protest the rewrite. Like a virus resisting infection, their cells struggle to reconcile 2 conflicting versions of reality. And in that tension, they bleed, they shake, they split. Gray wrote of this in his private notes. In 1979, he visited a man from Missouri who claimed his childhood home had been corrected out of existence. The man had scars on his arms, deep, jagged lines, but swore he had never been injured. He told Gray, "I'm tearing on the inside. Whatever I was before doesn't match what I'm supposed to be now. The seams won't hold." Here is the chilling truth. Erasure isn't clean. It leaves residue. Witnesses are not meant to survive, and when they do, their bodies betray them. That is why the files are so few. Not because replacements are rare, but because most who live through them cannot carry the contradiction for long. They collapse under the strain. Those who do endure are anomalies themselves. Proof that reality is not as stable as we pretend, and it gets darker. Some survivors reported mirroring. Look in the mirror, and for a second, the reflection doesn't move with you. It lags, or worse, it smiles when you don't. Survivors of erased towns consistently describe this, as if their image is tied to the version of themselves that no longer exists, and in stolen moments, that version peers back through the glass. One boy, 14 years old, who lived through the transition of Harrison to Fairview, drew dozens of sketches of his own reflection. In every one, his mirrored self had no eyes, just empty sockets, dark and hollow. Weeks later, his parents found him standing barefoot in front of their bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning, whispering, "He wants me to go where he went." And then he was gone. Police wrote it up as a runaway case, but in his room, on the floor beneath the mirror, lay a single slip of paper, not in the boy's handwriting. Just 2 words scrawled in the same uniform script found in the Jennings County ledger, not compatible. So now the question becomes unbearable. If the silence doesn't just erase towns but claws at the bodies of those left behind, what is it trying to do? Is it purging them, editing them, or is it something worse, replacing them slowly piece by piece until the survivor is no longer who they were? The missing teeth, the cellular anomalies, the reflections that don't obey. These are not side effects. They are doctors are trained to rationalize, to find causes in biology, chemistry, trauma. But the Project S file carried an unthinkable conclusion, scribbled in the margins by a terrified intern. These aren't medical conditions, these are corrections. And then came 1985, St. Mary's Hospital, Detroit. A research team there stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. They had been running longitudinal health studies, tracking families across generations. But in one particular household, the Callahans, the genetic record fractured. The grandmother's DNA didn't match her children. The children didn't match their own. And yet, the official state records swore they were a continuous bloodline. When the researchers raised questions, 2 of them vanished. The remaining members of the team retracted their paper and signed non-disclosure agreements. One nurse, before disappearing herself, left a note in her locker. "They've been replaced before birth. We're cataloging the wrong species. Do you see what this means? The silence doesn't wait until adulthood. It doesn't begin at the census or the map. It can rewrite you at conception, which means entire bloodlines may already be hollow. Families we believe are ours, seeded generations ago, but in truth, born of something else. The medical archives hold other horrors, if you know where to look. Case studies where X-rays reveal bones that don't align with the patient's skeleton. Surgeries where organs are found inverted, mirrored like a photograph reversed. Routine dental exams where fillings disappear between visits, as if the teeth themselves belong to a different person. And yet, every time one of these files emerges, it is quickly buried. Hospitals lose funding. Archives burn in accidental fires. Doctors who speak out are quietly transferred, then erased. It's almost predictable. The closer someone comes to documenting the silence as a biological phenomenon, the faster they vanish. Why? Because biology is harder to deny. You can explain away memory. You can dismiss maps. But a blood type that changes, a child who doesn't share DNA with their mother, a shadow that doesn't obey physics, that is harder to bury, unless you erase not just the patient, but the doctor too. And that's exactly what happens. The files we have are fragments smuggled out by frightened staff. Photocopies, scribbles, stolen negatives, but every single one tells the same story. The silence isn't abstract, it isn't just administrative. It lives inside the body, inside blood and bone, and it fights to remain hidden. The terrifying part is this. If the medical record is the last line of evidence and the silence is already erasing it, then we are running out of places to hide. Two versions of me stitched together. Sometimes I dream as one, sometimes as the other. Sometimes I don't know which one is real when I wake up. Thomas died in 1963, or at least he should have. His death certificate exists, signed and filed, but there are multiple eyewitness accounts of Thomas being seen decades later, unchanged, walking alone in towns he had no connection to. One farmer swore he spoke to him in 1989. He said Thomas smiled, shook his hand and whispered, "You're not supposed to remember me." He's not the only one. Another case, Maria Alvarez, 1972, New Mexico. She lived in a village that disappeared after a supposed chemical spill. Maria was one of 3 survivors. The other 2 suffered seizures, bleeding, and eventually death. Maria, however, emerged improved. She learned languages rapidly. She could recall entire books word for word after a single read. Most chilling of all, she began finishing people's sentences before they spoke, word for word, as though she were listening to a script only she could hear. Neighbors reported she sometimes lagged, repeating a gesture twice like a film reel skipping. When asked, Maria said it was because she could see the other version of herself acting in parallel. By 1980, she had disappeared, but scattered reports place her across the US, boarding trains without tickets, standing silently at disaster sites days before they occurred. Then, there's case D47, found in the stolen Project S file. A man in Kentucky, 1991, no name given, just the note. Survived rewrite without degradation. Subject exhibits immunity to correction, possible carrier state. What does that mean? Carrier state. The file hints that some survivors don't just resist the silence, they become vessels for it. The anomalies that once tore others apart, missing teeth, shifting shadows, doubled reflections, in these individuals. Jewels stabilize. Instead of breaking, they merge with the rewrite, and in doing so, they gain access to something unthinkable, knowledge of what's coming. These survivors whisper warnings before erasures happen. They sketch towns no one has ever heard of, until they vanish from maps a decade later. They describe faces of people not yet born, then those same faces appear in census records years later. It's as if, in adapting, they are granted glimpses of the script behind the world. But it comes with a cost. Witnesses describe these adapted survivors as unsettling. Their movements feel rehearsed, their eyes linger too long, they sometimes forget how to blink. One priest who spoke to a carrier swore the man's voice doubled. One word spoken by 2 mouths at once. He fled mid-conversation, claiming, "I wasn't talking to him, I was talking to whatever had replaced him from the inside." This is why adapted survivors are hunted most ruthlessly. Bureaucratic teams move in faster than ever. Files vanish overnight. Families of these individuals often disappear alongside them, because these people, these adapted, are living proof not only that the silence exists, but that it can be inhabited, controlled, maybe even weaponized. And here lies the most disturbing speculation of all. What if the silence isn't trying to destroy us? What if it's recruiting us? The failures bleed and vanish, the adapted endure, and in enduring they carry pieces of whatever intelligence drives the erasures. They are not victims, they are not witnesses, they are hybrids. Which raises a final, unbearable question. How many of them walk among us now, unnoticed, smiling, shaking hands, their shadows half a second too slow? By the late 20th century, the anomalies were no longer just folklore, no longer whispers passed between families who lost children to vanished towns. Too many medical files, too many rewritten survivors, too many witnesses describing the same impossible things. And governments, especially ours, noticed. The first confirmed program appears under a codename blacked out in declassified CIA documents. Researchers pieced together fragments and gave it a name: Operation Night Harvest. Its purpose, not to prevent erasures, not to protect citizens, but to catalogue and weaponize survivors of the silence. The earliest evidence comes from 1968. A military report described a containment facility hidden beneath a disused Air Force base in Nevada. The file referenced Category Red individuals, those who adapted without breaking, carriers. Witnesses say these subjects were kept in isolation chambers, hooked to machines measuring not just vitals, but electromagnetic fluctuations, ambient radiation, even seismic activity. Why? Because the government believed survivors weren't merely anomalies. They were antennas, living receivers tuned to whatever signal governs the erasures. Think about that. People who could sense the next disappearance. Entire towns erased before they existed on a map, foretold by a whisper in a survivor's dream. But something went wrong. In 1973, 3 adapted individuals were transferred from Nevada to a secure site in Virginia. Days later, the facility burned to the ground. Officially, the fire was electrical. Unofficially, fragments of testimony suggest the survivors themselves started it, not with matches, but with a coordinated event. Security footage, now destroyed, supposedly showed walls bending inward, as though the facility itself was being rewritten from within. The survivors vanished, not fled, vanished, as though the silence reclaimed them the moment the government tried to lock it down. And yet, the experiments continued. By the 1980s, whispers of MK Sable surfaced, a spin-off of the infamous MK Ultra. Where Ultra dealt with controlling the mind, Sable focused on rewriting identity. Survivors were injected with unknown compounds, forced into sensory deprivation for months, their DNA harvested, their dreams recorded. One debriefing notes a chilling phrase: subjects exhibit unstable synchronization with control timeline. Control timeline. The phrase suggests something far darker, that the government didn't just believe in the silence, they believed it was editing history itself, and survivors weren't victims but glitches in the script. But if you think the government was in control of this, you're wrong, because by the 1990s the projects collapsed, too many containment breaches, too many missing personnel, files shredded, facilities abandoned, and yet survivors kept surfacing, not fewer but more. Theories spread among whistleblowers, maybe by hunting them, by prodding and dissecting them. The government accelerated the infection. Maybe the silence is self-defensive. Every attempt to cage it only multiplies its reach. One chilling memo leaked in 2001 sums it up best. The more we look, the more it notices us. The more it notices us, the closer it comes. Cease operations immediately. But here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. There are strong indications that the operations never really stopped, because across rural America, strange black convoys still appear after disappearances. Witnesses report men in unmarked uniforms collecting debris, seizing photo albums, even digging up graves. Entire libraries emptied overnight, police chiefs sworn to secrecy, and then there are the children. Survivors who adapt young are especially valuable. The rare cases where a child resists erasure, those are the ones governments covet. Whispered rumors speak of schools that aren't schools at all. Facilities where children are taught to dream in patterns, to hear the edits before they arrive. Imagine it. A generation raised not to fear the silence but to speak its language. If that's true, then it's no longer about survival. It's about control, about harnessing the very force that has been erasing us for centuries. But here's the danger no one wants to admit. What if the silence isn't ours to control? What if by breeding survivors into weapons the government has already lost the battle? What if the adapted children they've been training aren't loyal to us at all? Think back to Thomas Eddings, Maria Alvarez, Case D47. Survivors don't come back unchanged. They come back aligned with something else. Something that doesn't need permission. Something that looks at us the way we look at insects. And if governments are raising these children, then maybe the silence isn't invading anymore. Maybe it's integrating. And maybe one day, you won't need to lose a town or a family to the silence. Maybe one day, it will walk up to your front door, knock politely, and smile with a face you almost recognize. For centuries, people assumed the silence was an invader, a parasite, something that came from outside the world, reaching in to delete us. That's how folklore painted it. The great unknown, a darkness pressing in. But what if the silence didn't come from outside at all? What if we built the door ourselves, and opened it? Hidden in academic archives, buried under misfiled research, are fragments of a theory that makes even hardened investigators recoil. It appears in whispers across disciplines: linguistics, physics, anthropology. Different fields, same conclusion, that the silence may not have been forced upon us. It may be a consequence of something we began. Consider this: rewriting doesn't just erase places or people, it erases records. Books vanish, journals bounce. Hard drives fry, paintings crumble, and yet, sometimes fragments survive. Patterns recur, Whole phrases echo across centuries. One recurring phrase found in an 1891 linguistics paper from Prague resurfaced in a 1954 classified physics document, and again in a 2007 anonymous forum leak: the language of unmaking. What does that mean? According to the Prague paper, it referred to an experiment in ancient times, a set of symbols believed to hold no meaning, yet when spoken aloud, listeners reported profound disorientation. Crops failed near villages where the words were used, livestock died, children went missing. The symbols were destroyed, but the idea lingered: language that doesn't describe reality, but rewrites it. The physics file was worse. It suggested those same symbols matched patterns detected in cosmic background radiation, the faint hiss of the universe left over from the Big Bang. The scientists proposed that what we hear as random static might actually be instructions. And when translated, they resembled the ancient language of unmaking. So here's the horrifying possibility: the silence isn't a parasite, it's a protocol, a system woven into reality itself, a script waiting to be read. And once humans began to stumble across fragments of it, through chance, experiments, even physics equations, we accidentally triggered it. In other words, we taught the silence how to see us. And every time we repeat the patterns, in research, in ritual, in data, we remind it we exist. That's why erasures increase with attention. That's why survivors multiply when governments study them, because the silence isn't hunting us blindly. We are feeding it coordinates. The terrifying: every attempt to map the silence is an invitation. Every word we write in its tongue is a flare in the dark. We're not discovering it, we're building a doorway for it, brick by brick. But here's the fracture point. Not everyone agrees stopping is the answer. There are those who believe the silence isn't a predator at all, that it's an upgrade, a way to shed history, identity, even mortality. If erasure wipes you from one timeline, maybe it plants you in another. Maybe the adapted survivors aren't broken, they're first generation. To these people, the language of unmaking isn't a threat, it's a gift, the beginning of evolution. And so, in hidden circles, secret forums, encrypted gatherings, untraceable cults, the language is still being studied, still being spoken. What happens when too many voices chant in unison? When the language echoes loud enough not just for the silence to hear, but for it to answer? We may be closer to that point than anyone dares admit, because lately, the survivors aren't just carrying the silence. Some of them have started teaching, whispering words that don't belong in human throats, writing symbols that flicker when you look at them as though they're alive, passing on fragments of the tongue that began it all. And if they succeed, if enough of us learn to speak the language, then erasure won't come piece by piece anymore. Not one town here, one family there. It will come all at once, a single, rewritten sentence. And everything we ever were, everything we ever will be replaced by something else entirely. The silence is not invading. The silence is waiting, and we're the ones who keep opening the door. If governments tried to weaponize the silence, then cults tried to worship it. And unlike the bureaucrats who shredded files and burned facilities when things got out of hand, these people never stopped. They've only grown bolder. Reports of silence worshippers stretch back further than most realize. Folklore describes them as the hollowed, families who abandoned towns before erasures occurred, as though they knew it was coming. Local sheriffs in the 1930s described cabins found empty, food still on the table, journals half-written, except for one chilling detail: passages scrawled in symbols no one could translate, repeating until the ink ran dry. But by the late 20th century, these groups weren't hiding anymore. Take the Order of the Returning Dawn, first noted in Kentucky in 1979. Survivors describe hooded figures gathered in abandoned schools, chanting in rhythms that didn't match any known language. Members claimed erasure was not death, but the Great Correction, a cleansing of flawed timelines. They sought it out, begged for it, even left offerings, teeth, fingernails, family photographs, hoping the silence would notice. One chilling police report from 1982 details a farmhouse raid. Inside were 13 members of the order, seated in a circle, faces painted black. Each had carved symbols into their arms. Each was smiling. Not one of them resisted. By morning, their cells were empty, locks intact, cameras blank. The police officers who conducted the raid, every single one resigned within the month. Another faction, far more secretive, surfaced online in the early 2000s. Known only as the Choir, they believe the silence is not a void but a voice, a consciousness waiting for enough listeners. Members gather in digital forums to share audio files, bizarre low-frequency hums said to thin the veil. Researchers who've listened report migraines, nosebleeds, and a feeling that someone else was inside the room. What unites these cults is not fear of erasure, but longing. They want to be part of it. They see survivors not as cursed, but as chosen. And here's where it gets more dangerous. Cult activity seems to predict erasures. A journalist in 2010 mapped dozens of unexplained disappearances against sightings of Order of the Returning Dawn gathering. Every cult leaves them behind, carved into trees, scrawled in ash, written on bathroom mirrors, and when investigators photograph them, the symbols blur, warp, or vanish altogether. One surviving cult document smuggled from an initiation describes their goal in blunt terms. We are the bridge. The silence requires a mouth. Each word we chant is a door. Each door opens wider. One day the sky will speak, and when it does, we will answer. It's not just small groups in the woods anymore. The Choir has spread across social media under layers of irony and memes, hiding their rituals in plain sight. Strange hashtags, live streams with distorted audio, songs that, when slowed down, reveal patterns, fragments of the language of unmaking. Thousands watch, unaware they're repeating chants once whispered in caves centuries ago. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not that governments fail to contain it, not that survivors keep multiplying, but that ordinary people, bored and curious, are spreading the silence themselves, clicking, sharing, repeating, speaking the words out loud because it feels harmless. But it isn't harmless, because each repetition is another flare, another invitation, another reminder to the silence that we are here. And if the cults are right, if the silence isn't a void but a voice waiting for enough echoes, then we are building its choir one syllable at a time. And maybe soon it won't need the cults at all, because the rest of us will be chanting with hospitals. Even entire governments report statistical anomalies that, when decoded, are nothing less than missing populations. And yet there's always a pattern. Every erasure begins with whispers, cult activity, survivor sightings, or data corruption. Then the symbols appear, then the language, and finally, one night, the silence arrives. The survivors multiply. Families forget their children, neighbors vanish, records blur, the rewritten live on, fractured, not whole, while the rest of us tell ourselves it was just a tragedy. But tragedies leave evidence. The silence doesn't. It leaves only absence. Here is the most terrifying possibility, whispered in classified reports, hinted in folklore, scrawled in survivor journals. The silence isn't coming. It's already here. It has always been here. Not an invader, not a parasite, but a built-in function of reality, a fail-safe system designed to erase what shouldn't exist. We aren't being hunted, we're being corrected. Think about it. Every human culture carries myths of forgetting, names you must not speak, songs that should not be sung, forbidden words, lost histories, erased gods. Perhaps those weren't metaphors, perhaps they were warnings, perhaps long before us, others stumbled into the same patterns, spoke the same syllables, built the same flares, and were rewritten. And maybe, deep down, we know this. Why else do we instinctively fear silence? Why else do we fill it with noise, music, chatter, distraction? Because silence isn't empty. Silence is waiting. If you've listened this far, you might already feel it. The itch in the back of your mind, the flicker in the corner of your eye, that chill when you realize you can't quite remember who lived next door when you were a child. Was it a family, a man, no one at all? You might check online, only to find no record. Ask relatives, and they'll look confused. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel the quiet creeping closer. Because by seeking the silence, by tracing its history, sharing its stories, speaking its language, you've already invited it in. That's the paradox. The more we fight to expose it, the stronger it grows. The more we document, the faster it erases. And now, by watching, by listening, by remembering, you've placed yourself on its map. There's one last entry. A phrase found across every timeline, every survivor testimony, every classified